think one of the first things I noticed about your work, I need to tell a brief. I was in London soon after James Blake's, his sort of breakthrough hit came through, and I was talking to my friend. I was like, what an interesting progression, because he went from doing sort of like a cool, low-profile dubstep 12 inches, and then started putting in his voice as kind of a process thing, and then suddenly it's like this pop territory. So moving from a sort of invisibility anonymous producer into and I said it to a journalist friend, and he was like, oh yeah, he's got a high-powered manager, and he's very handsome, and he was like, it's a very commercial move in terms of this progression. But what I noticed about your work had this similar kind of starting off, at least in what reached me, as being very abstracted, and then slowly ideas of voice and visibility went into it in a way which didn't feel like it was a commercial move, but rather it was part of a very kind of fascinating artistic trajectory and sort of statement that you were making. And it wasn't just with one song, but it was following your sounds for like 2 years or so. And so I'm just kind of curious about how you think about that, like these longer arcs when people are following your work. And like you said, like what is maybe singing is a very vulnerable thing for you, but.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think there's a lot of factors that went into that. I mean, one of them is just like, what I was interested in and investigating kind of like pushed me, especially with, chorus a little bit, but especially with home, having to find that vulnerable place and put myself forward a little bit. So there's, just some of that just like thematically kind of pushed me in that way, but also, just my own comfort level of like, I never thought of myself, I still don't think of myself as like a vocalist or like a pop singer or anything like that, that's never really how I've perceived myself. So it was always just, it's been this kind of like evolution of like, how can I push myself to different places where I'm uncomfortable, but it's still me, where I'm, challenging myself. So I think it's partly personal, and I think it's also partly cultural. I think that the landscape has changed from when I started, from when movement came out to today. I feel like people have shifted their perspective. People are more open to things. I feel like, genres are more smashed together. I feel like pop isn't as dirty of a word as it was several years ago. It's funny, I was at Unsound a couple weeks ago, and it's like, everyone was smiling and dancing. Not that people weren't smiling at Unsound 3 years ago, but it was definitely more like this kind of thing. And this year it was more kind of like this kind of thing. And it was like, I don't know, I just think that attitudes and shifts change. And so that's definitely, I'm also responding to my environment in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, seeing again the chorus video and the home video, I was reminded of how, I like them both quite a bit, because chorus, you're really grappling with this idea of what is contemporary space. You're inside the home, you're inside the laptop, there's products floating around, there's no sort of outside world. And so to me that links into this idea of the laptop being this very intimate instrument. It's like we are cyborg, like the Donna Haraway you're referencing, and there is no escape from the wires and the signals that are permeating us now. So then the question becomes, what now? What next?
Yeah, and what kind of ownership do we want to take over it? Or, do we as artists want to be driving the conversation, or do we want to be on the reactionary side where we're constantly like off of our foot, whatever that, I'm like really mangling phrases today. You know what I'm saying though, but and that's one thing that I find really inspiring about artists who are also working in areas of digital activism and software development. I know I keep talking about Matt Dryhurst, but I'm going to bring it up again. He just released a piece of software called Saga that's all around kind of this idea of self-hosting and artists having their own agency of the work that they release online. So I find that kind of stuff really inspiring, and I love it when artists are really kind of awake and aware and interested in kind of having some sort of agency in where the conversation is going. And I feel like, on top of that, I feel like that takes a degree of optimism. I feel like I love a dystopian artwork, and I love post-apocalyptic, of course, I love science fiction, we all do. And I think that I also draw on those aesthetics sometimes, but I feel like when we're constantly in that kind of negative zone or in that kind of like fatalistic zone, I feel like in a way that kind of is like, whoop, well, I can't do anything. You know, it kind of like takes the burden off of us. So I feel like we have to pair that with like a degree of optimism and a degree of kind of like forward propelling motion so that we can actually have some sort of say in the way that things are going.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having a conversation about science fiction literature with a friend, and he was just like, it's 95% dystopian.
Yeah.
You know? And this wasn't always the case. If you look back to the 60s, people are writing these books of envisioning a totally different and less grim history or future. And like, what does that mean if our imagination is already kind of shrunken? And so it's, of course, exciting to think about electronic music, contemporary artwork's role in, you know, expanding the possibilities. And I guess that brings me to the question of, you know, you began with talking about the way in which both the club and the academy have their sort of unspoken rules. You know, you can't use a 4/4 kick, or you'll be looked down on in the classroom, and it may be in the club, this idea of like, the concept ruling the club is going to be like pleasure principle. You must dance, you must have fun, you must be kind of, and so I guess it's how do you think about navigating those different spaces, creating a work that draws on multiple histories, multiple performing contexts? How do you negotiate that in terms of where you're choosing to play, or how you might take a sort of club or academic setup and flip the sort of default structures?
I mean, I think a lot of that's just through really good curation. So I've worked with a lot of amazing promoters who know that, like, you know, I also have aspects of my set that are totally euphoric, and it's kind of even going in a more kind of euphoric direction as I've expanded to include Matt and Colin in the band. But, you know, just if promoters know that it's like a time in the night when people really just need to be like slapped in the face with a 4/4, then they're probably not going to want to listen to me doing Breathe. So like maybe like don't put me in that slot. But I think audiences have like, I don't know if this is just, I don't know if like my booking agent and the promoters are getting better at slotting me, or if audiences are evolving, but I feel like it's becoming less and less awkward. I mean, I've certainly played super awkward concerts and I've put myself in all kinds of weird situations, but I feel like you always kind of learn something from those and you get something out of it. I remember we did this one tour where it was like, everything was perfect and it was really boring, because it was like, oh, we didn't really have to face anything that was like weird and like not upsetting, but challenging in a way. So I think it's good to constantly be shifting environments and not just kind of like get in this rut of like, okay, this is my safe zone. I know that people are going to need to hear this filter sweep at this moment, and that's going to hit. You know, it's like, it's good to challenge yourself and the audience in that way, I think.
Yeah, and one thing we've been emailing some ideas in preparation for this, and one of the phrases I loved, you ended it with, sometimes it's easier to sing an idea than it is to program it.
Yeah, I was listening to some of your music yesterday as I was kind of like preparing this, and Jace wrote this really awesome article on autotune for free several years ago, and I was listening to some of the production and some of the tracks. There's this. In a lot of the Middle Eastern music, there's this kind of like violin sweep that happens often. And that was actually something I was thinking about when working on a track, and Exit. So Matt and I went to Egypt several years ago, and we really got into Nancy Ajram, who's like a pop star there. And I just loved this kind of like super dramatic sweeping violin kind of thing. And so I was trying to figure out how to do that with a synth. And then I set up a few different patches and processes, and I was able to just kind of like sing in the idea, and it was like 1,000 times easier than trying to get the glissando at that exact moment. And so sometimes it is just like more immediate to kind of set up a process and then just like sing it out.
Yeah, and it's kind of, to me, I actually misread it when I first saw the quote. I'm like, sometimes it's easier to sing an idea than it is to say it. And so, but this I'm thinking, so, and which also makes sense in this idea of the ways in which a sound can carry so much information in and of itself, the way a sound carries a politic.
Right.
even at the sort of the most abstract level or something like that.
Yeah, and this is something that I think I've grappled with since the very beginning, is like how to make a sound which is inherently abstract from language, how to make that communicate something that kind of goes beyond language. And like you said, sometimes it can communicate more, and then sometimes it can be so obtuse that it's really, you know, I've had like very specific ideas of things that I've wanted to communicate, and then trying to do that with a synthesizer, I'm like, how do I get this across with like this tool? So yeah, I think it kind of goes both ways. Sounds are super embedded with all kinds of like cultural and historical, I guess you could call it baggage, but also you could call it, you know, richness.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think like the home is one of these examples of like, you know, it's this wonderful sort of inversion of the love song, you know, the NSA agent. But even if I didn't know any of that and I just came to it, you know, it's like this ideas of voice, of processing. You mentioned cutting off the attack and the end delay, and this idea of kind of contemporary existence as being endlessly mediated in a way which is suddenly beautiful and then suddenly distancing and troubling, and you're kind of just negotiating that within the song. And then if you want to start looking at the logos and thinking about Snowden, you can do that as well, or you can just sort of feel what that might be like through that song.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of going back to this idea of pop as a carrier signal. So like if pop is actually functioning and doing its pop job, then it is actually kind of like immediately a visceral and maybe likable is the wrong word, but immediately approachable in a way, that you're getting something out of it. But I like the idea of it being this carrier signal and having all of these other messages embedded within it. So if you do want to peel back and you do want to find the other layers, you can.
Yeah. It was seeing the last slide with the installation with the animals running. I love that idea. And partly it engages like oftentimes sound art, installation art is very dour. It's very like dystopic, or at least sort of, there's like joy and surprise aren't necessarily highly valued within that. And so ideas of sound animals running around the gallery space was really lovely. But then you mentioned Turner, and specifically this painting, Rain, Steam, and Speed. And when people think of Turner, you know, he does these beautiful washed out like landscapes and ships. But then there's this idea of, you know, late 19th century, like he's kind of invoking this sort of the sublime of the modern, with speed and with all these, but it's still thinking about what is that like? What would that emotionally be like if you're standing before a painting? Like, how can we evoke all the strangeness of our contemporary moment?
Right. Yeah, I think that's actually a very astute observation. That's something that I'm thinking about all the time, is like how to capture these new emotions that we're feeling right now in this kind of like brave new world that we're living in. But it's true, like, you know, getting someone breaking up with you via text message, that's like a different emotion. That's a different emotional state than someone doing it to your face. Or, you know, so there's all of these different ways that our relationships are mediated, and they create new emotions. And I feel like those new emotions need new sounds to go with them. I don't like the idea of kind of like everything being drenched with like a sun-kissed 70s California nostalgia, even though I love that stuff sometimes. But it's like, we're in 2015, so what are these new feelings and what do these new emotions sound like, and what do they mean to us today? And of course, that draws from the entire musical history and past that we have. So things from the past will filter in and be there, but how can we discuss what's happening today with the sound palette that is from today? And that's really challenging, and I think I fail at that a lot of times, and I think sometimes I like alienate people because I really like a lot of abrasive sound design as well, so sometimes I have to like, you know, dial it back a little bit, because not everybody wants to hear the like scraping and the crashing that I want to hear all the time. But yeah, that's something that I'm really interested in trying to tease out, and that's like an ongoing process.
Yeah, of course. This idea of this weird present moment has the very distinct flavor, and you can't really evoke it in sound or in any other format by sort of looking back or trying to be imitative. You sort of need to go into these explorations or collaborations, and actually, I wanted to ask you about your process. Not as obviously it's collaborator. You're acknowledging your collaborators in a way which is very great, you know, sort of transparent and open source in a way, you know, shout out to the MetaHaven intern. But I'd like to talk to you about Boss, about Holly Herndon as the sort of orchestrator behind this, in an open-ended way. Like, how do you negotiate being in all these very complex, very engaged relationships with lots of different collaborators, and yet at the end of the day, you know, it's your name, it's your face in the album cover, and you're sort of like a certain amount of aesthetic responsibility falls on you.
Right. I think boss is the wrong word. I feel really uncomfortable with that.
CEO.
No. It's non-hierarchical in that way. Of course I say that, and then yes, I could veto whatever's gonna like not land on the album. And of course it is my head. And so I'm like, okay, so I guess it is hierarchical. But I don't feel like the process is like that. I'm not going at it like that. You know, like for example, the piece Unequal that I wrote with Colin, who's here, that was us just sending each other ideas and files over the internet, and it was just like super organic. It just kind of like, you know, came. It wasn't like, you know, I want you to do this and do that. It was like, we were both coming together. How can we create something new together? And it's the same with like, you know, I've been with Matt for like 8 years now, and he has such an intimate, that's why it's so amazing that we can collaborate so much, because he has such an intimate knowledge of my work that I don't have to go through and explain things or talk about like aesthetic pitfalls or like no-goes, because he already knows that stuff so well. And you know, that's been a process also, you know, being in a partnership and a creative partnership. That's why it was really important for me to do movement by myself and not, you know, like this is my thing, especially as a woman producer. You know, people really love to kind of detract from the work that women do. So it was really important that I was like this, like did this kind of like lone thing for that first one, but then I was like, you know what, screw that. Like, I'm not gonna let people's biases, you know, inhibit really good work. And I actually, when I'm working with other people, I think a lot of new and interesting things kind of come out of that. So I wanna continue that. Like, different people bring different things to the table, of course. And the collaboration with Metahaven and Matt, I mean, it was really emotional and it was really intense. I mean, we had these like huge Google Doc conversations, like just paragraphs and paragraphs of us unloading ideas on each other. And, you know, there were like angry Skype conversations and, you know, it's like passionate conversations about album art, which it seems funny, but yeah, I don't know if I...
And that's the lesser side scene of the lesser seen side of the intimacy you're talking about. If you're gonna have a collaboration which is you're trying to make it non-hierarchical and fairly horizontal, then you need a lot of trust, then you need a lot of intimacy, and then things are going to necessarily get messy. You're sort of...
Well, that's the thing. Also, like everyone that I've worked with, they're people who I know fairly well, who's, you know, it's not like I vet everyone's total life philosophy, but I understand where their work's coming from. You know, it's most of the people are working in multiple fields. They're not just working on one thing, and I'm really appreciative of the other kind of the things that go into their practice. So yeah, I feel lucky to be able to work with the people that I work with. And of course I have to let go sometimes and be like, I'm not gonna micromanage this. You know, there are decisions that were made where if it was all up to me, I would have been like, no, but then I kind of, you know, did this like, okay, I'm gonna let it go. And then in the end, I was glad that, you know, like I said no to lip singing to Home for like weeks. They were like, you have to. And I was like, hell no, I'm not lip singing. But finally it came around, and actually I needed to. Like, it works really well in that context.
That's great. I guess there's one last quick question. What's the last bit of, I don't know, essay, sound, gallery show or whatever that's inspired you and might filter into your thoughts on process?
Oh God, this is a hard question. I feel like I sometimes go through periods where I just don't listen to anything at all.
Fair enough.
I guess one thing that was kind of like interesting or eye-opening about Unsound was kind of the shift of production technique over the last couple of years. So Richie Houghton did like a guest DJ set at the end of the night, unannounced, which was actually really cool on the smaller stage. After listening to the production technique throughout the day, you know, people like Angel Ho and you know, Visionist and Jay Lynn, all these people, and then I listened to this minimal techno set and it sounded so light. And I was like, wow, production's gotten like really heavy and like a really visceral kind of like punch you in the face kind of way that was like really muscular and meaty. And that was, yeah, I guess that's inspiring in a way of like how kind of like physical and visceral it's kind of become.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.